There's a sacred moment in every marriage, one that transcends words, surpasses logic, and echoes something eternal. It's not found in the wedding vows or the family dinners, not even in raising children or shared bank accounts. It's in the quiet, intimate sanctuary of sexual connection, where two souls become one flesh. And when that holy place is rejected, when a spouse is consistently turned away, it doesn't just hurt feelings, it wounds the covenant. It fractures something deep within the heart of the marriage itself. I've spent decades walking alongside couples on the brink of divorce. I've heard the tears of men and women who have felt unwanted in their own homes, invisible in their own bedrooms. And I can tell you without reservation that one of the most common unspoken wounds in marriage is the pain of sexual rejection. Now, before we go any further, let's get something straight. This is not about pressure. This is not about manipulation. This is not about anyone owing their spouse something. What I'm about to share is not born from judgment, but from deep compassion. Because I've seen what happens when we ignore this issue. I've seen the affairs, the emotional disconnection, the loneliness that grows like mold in the corners of a home. And I've seen marriages resurrected, even after years of rejection and hurt, when one or both spouses decided to lean in, to heal, and to love with both body and soul. Sex is not just physical, it's profoundly emotional, spiritual even. God didn't design sex merely for procreation. He created it as a divine expression of unity, vulnerability, and mutual delight. When we marry, we don't just pledge financial partnership or parenting teamwork. We offer ourselves fully, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. We say, you may know me and be known by me in ways no one else ever will. So when one spouse repeatedly says no to sexual intimacy, especially without conversation or understanding, it doesn't register as a simple refusal. To the rejected spouse, it often feels like a denial of love itself. It echoes through their mind as I'm not wanted, I'm not attractive, I'm not loved. Over time, it's not just the body that's starved, it's the heart. Let's be real, life gets hard. There are seasons when energy is low, stress is high, and physical affection feels like the last thing on your mind. There are times when emotional wounds or past trauma make sex feel unsafe, and sometimes you might feel distant because of unresolved conflicts. That's understandable, we're human. But here's the danger. When rejection becomes a pattern, when sex becomes transactional, weaponized, or simply withheld without explanation, it signals something far deeper. It sends the message, you're not worth reaching for. And for many, that becomes unbearable. I once counseled a husband who broke down in tears during our session. He wasn't angry, he was ashamed. For months, he'd been turned away every time he reached out to his wife. He told me, I don't even know if I'm allowed to want her anymore. Every time I try, she acts like I'm disgusting. This man wasn't crude, he wasn't selfish. He was starving for connection. His longing wasn't just about sex. It was about being close, being chosen, being loved. And I've sat with wives too, beautiful, brave women who felt more like roommates or nannies than lovers, women who felt invisible in their own homes. One woman told me he's affectionate in public, but at home he turns his back to me. I've started questioning everything about myself. Am I not beautiful anymore? Does he love me at all? Let me tell you something powerful. Sexual desire is not a sin. It is a God-given longing for connection and union. But when that longing is consistently unmet, it creates vulnerability, not just to temptation, but to emotional despair. That's not just my opinion. Psychology confirms this. Studies show that sexual rejection activates the same brain centers associated with physical pain. It literally hurts. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking, but Dr. Joe, what about my needs? What about my past trauma, my fatigue, my resentment? or the lack of emotional connection in the relationship. And I hear you. I do. I'm not asking you to ignore your pain. I'm asking you to explore it with your spouse, with a counselor, with God, because healing is possible, and withholding love physically or emotionally will never solve the problem. It only deepens it. What most couples don't realize is this: sexual rejection is almost never just about sex. It's about everything else: communication, trust, past wounds, fear, resentment, shame. And unless we deal with those things, intimacy will always suffer. God designed marriage to be a place of safety, not starvation. A place where love isn't just spoken but expressed deeply, joyfully, consistently. And when both spouses commit to nurturing that sacred space, even if it's hard, even if it's awkward at first, miracles happen. Walls come down, healing begins, and a marriage that once felt cold can burn bright again. I'm not saying it'll be easy. Vulnerability never is, but I promise you this: it is worth it. Your marriage is worth it. Your spouse is worth it. You are worth it. So if you're reading this and you feel a pang in your heart, maybe as the one who's been rejected, or maybe as the one who's been turning away, take a breath. This is not the end of the story. God's mercy is new every morning. The same grace that raised Christ from the grave can resurrect the love in your marriage. And resurrection can resurrect the love in your marriage. But it begins with honesty, with courage, with one step toward your spouse, not away. In the pages that follow, we'll unpack exactly how sexual rejection affects your marriage emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. We'll talk about what's behind the rejection, how to talk about it with grace, how to restore trust, how to rekindle desire, and how to move from silent suffering to sacred connection. Whether your marriage is hanging by a thread or simply missing the fire it once had, this is your invitation to hope again, to reach again, to love again. Because every great marriage isn't built on perfection. It's built on pursuit. And today, maybe it's time to start pursuing each other again, heart, mind, and body. Sexual intimacy within marriage is far more than a physical act. It is a covenantal expression of unity, vulnerability, and deep spiritual connection. In fact, when God designed marriage, he created sex as one of the most powerful symbols of the oneness he intended for a husband and wife. In Genesis, we read that the two shall become one flesh. And while that certainly includes physical union, it also points to something profoundly sacred. Two people choosing to merge not only their bodies, but their hearts, lives, and destinies. Sexual intimacy, then, isn't just a biological function. It's an act of mutual giving and receiving, of saying, I still choose you fully, without shame. When a husband or wife gives themselves to their spouse in that vulnerable and sacred space, it's a way of renewing the vows, not with words, but with presence. It says, I see you, I know you, and I want you. It's a celebration of commitment, a language of love that communicates acceptance, desire, and emotional closeness. That's why it's not just about physical release. It's about connection. It's about building trust. It's about creating a safe place where both people can return again and again to find affirmation and unity. But when this covenant expression is withheld, especially without communication or clarity, it doesn't just feel like a no to sex. It often feels like a no to the marriage itself. Over time, that absence can erode the foundation of unity God intended. Not because one spouse is being selfish for desiring sex, but because God wove that desire into the very fabric of marriage. It's meant to be a reminder of the love that brought you together in the first place, and a way of sustaining that love through the ups and downs of life. And when sex becomes rare or absent in a marriage, the connection it fosters begins to weaken. Without the glue of physical intimacy, emotional closeness can start to fray. Resentments grow quietly, misunderstandings multiply, and before long, the couple finds themselves living as cohabitants rather than covenant partners. That's not the marriage God designed. He meant for sex to be a gift, not just for pleasure, but for protection, for healing, and for reinforcing the sacred bond between two people committed to loving each other fully and faithfully. When couples begin to see sex not as an obligation or a chore, but as a covenantal privilege, everything changes. It becomes something to protect, to nurture, to prioritize. Not because we're trying to meet a quota or fulfill a duty, but because we recognize the divine power in saying, I still give myself to you, body, soul, and spirit. That's covenant love. And that kind of love can transform a marriage from something that survives into something that thrives. When a spouse is repeatedly turned away in moments of sexual vulnerability, the impact goes far deeper than the physical level. It strikes at the emotional core of the person being rejected. Over time, this pattern of denial can begin to shape how that spouse sees themselves, not just in terms of attractiveness or desirability, but in terms of worth. It becomes more than just, they don't want sex tonight. It starts to feel like they don't want me. And that kind of emotional wound can lead to deep insecurity, loneliness, and even shame. You see, sexual rejection, especially when it happens without explanation or compassion, rarely gets interpreted at face value. Our brains, wired for emotional connection, begin attaching meaning to the rejection. A husband might think, maybe I'm not good enough anymore. Maybe I'm failing as a man. A wife might wonder, am I not beautiful enough? Am I no longer cherished? These thoughts don't come from a place of arrogance. They come from longing, from the desire to be known and wanted by the one person who vowed to love them completely. This emotional toll builds gradually, often in silence. Many spouses don't talk about the rejection they feel because they're afraid of being seen as needy, selfish, or demanding, so they bottle it up. They pretend it doesn't matter. They stop initiating, stop asking, stop reaching out. But on the inside, they're grieving the closeness that once existed, grieving the warmth, the connection, the affirmation that came from being fully seen and embraced. And that grief, if left unattended, turns into distance. What's even more tragic is that both partners can end up feeling isolated. The one who is rejecting may be doing so because of unresolved pain, exhaustion, or emotional disconnection, but without honest conversations, the rejecting spouse often doesn't realize the depth of pain the partner is feeling. And the rejected spouse in turn begins to feel unloved and emotionally abandoned. This cycle continues until the emotional gap becomes so wide they forget how to find each other again. At the heart of every thriving marriage is emotional safety, the kind that says, you can bring your needs, your desires, your insecurities to me, and I won't reject you. When that safety is compromised, especially in the area of physical intimacy, it can feel like standing naked with your heart exposed, only to be turned away. It takes courage to be vulnerable like that, and every rejection chips away at that courage. But there is hope. Emotional wounds can be healed. Intimacy can be restored. It begins with empathy, with learning to listen not just to the words, but to the heart behind the silence. When spouses begin to see sexual rejection not as an isolated act, but as something that speaks volumes to the emotional health of the relationship, they can begin the work of rebuilding trust. And from that trust can grow the kind of emotional intimacy that makes both partners feel fully loved again, body, heart, and soul. One of the most devastating consequences of ongoing sexual rejection in a marriage is the rise of deep and persistent loneliness. This isn't the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. It's the aching isolation a person feels while lying next to the very one they love most, reaching out emotionally and physically, only to be met with silence, disinterest, or a cold shoulder. It's a loneliness that doesn't just sting, it haunts, because it's not just about being unwanted, it's about being unseen. In marriage, sexual intimacy is meant to be one of the primary places where connection is renewed, walls come down, and love is reaffirmed. When that place of closeness is closed off, it sends an unspoken message. You're not welcome here. And over time, the rejected spouse stops trying. They stop initiating, they stop reaching out, not because they don't care, but because rejection hurts too much to keep risking. And that's when emotional detachment begins to grow like a shadow between them. This kind of marital loneliness is different from other kinds. It's uniquely painful because it feels like betrayal, not in the dramatic, scandalous sense, but in the slow, silent drift that comes when two people stop choosing one another. A husband might still pay the bills and be present at dinner. A wife might still help with the kids and offer a polite good night. But beneath the surface, there is a void, a sense that what once made them us is slipping away. And often, neither spouse knows how to bridge that gap. This emotional loneliness can become a breeding ground for bitterness, self-doubt, and even despair. A spouse may begin to question whether love still exists in the relationship at all. They may feel abandoned, even though they share a house, a bed, and a life. And eventually, the hunger for closeness, if not addressed, can lead them to seek emotional connection elsewhere, even if unintentionally. But here's the truth. It doesn't have to stay that way. Marital loneliness born from sexual rejection is not a permanent sentence. It can be reversed. It begins with awareness, recognizing that sexual intimacy is not merely about desire, but about belonging. When spouses begin to realize that rejecting one another in this area creates emotional isolation, they can start taking intentional steps to reconnect, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Loneliness in marriage is a silent killer, but it can also be the spark that wakes a couple up to what's missing and inspires them to rebuild what was lost. Because when two people decide to face the isolation together, to talk about the pain, and to choose each other again in both small and sacred ways, loneliness begins to lose its grip. Intimacy returns, closeness grows, and the cold silence is replaced by something far more powerful: presence. Over time, repeated sexual rejection in a marriage doesn't just cause loneliness. It creates fertile ground for resentment, insecurity, and emotional distance. These are not surface-level problems. They dig deep into the heart and soul of the relationship. What begins as a simple "not tonight" can evolve into an unspoken narrative. You're not enough for me. I don't care about what you need. I'm not interested in knowing you fully anymore. Whether those words are ever spoken aloud or not, they are felt, and they echo through the emotional walls of the home. Resentment often starts small. A spouse who feels constantly rejected might begin by feeling hurt, then frustrated, and eventually bitter. They may start to believe that their needs don't matter in the relationship. This bitterness doesn't stay isolated to the bedroom. It seeps into other areas. Communication becomes colder. Small disagreements escalate, and kindness begins to dry up. They stop talking about their needs, not because they've stopped needing, but because they feel unheard or unworthy of love. And with that resentment comes a growing insecurity. The rejected spouse may begin to question their own desirability, identity, and value, not just as a sexual partner, but as a husband or wife. They may feel unattractive, inadequate, even invisible. The person who once made them feel cherished and chosen now makes them feel undesirable or emotionally repelled. That deep cut doesn't just impact self-esteem. It often leads to self-protection. They begin to withdraw emotionally to avoid the sting of further rejection. But what follows is emotional distance. This is where the marriage begins to truly suffer. Spouses may still share a schedule, a home, even responsibilities, but they stop sharing their hearts. They stop reaching for each other, not just physically, but in every way that matters. Eye contact lessens, conversations turn transactional, laughter fades. And without intentional healing, the marriage can begin to feel more like a contract than a covenant. What makes this cycle so tragic is that many couples don't even realize it's happening until the emotional distance becomes unbearable. The partner who's been rejecting intimacy may not understand the growing resentment or withdrawal, while the one who's been rejected may struggle to find the words to express their hurt. And so they both silently drift, each misunderstanding the other's pain, each trapped in their own emotional fortress. But there is a way back. It starts with honesty. Acknowledging how rejection affects not only the body, but the soul of the relationship. It continues with humility, being willing to hear, to listen, and to try again. And it thrives with grace, understanding that both spouses are human, that healing is possible, and that love, when pursued with courage, can overcome even the thickest walls of resentment. Resentment, insecurity, and distance are not the end of the story. They are signals, indicators that something sacred needs tending. And when a couple chooses to face those signals with love and intention, the marriage can be renewed from the inside out. One of the most serious and sobering consequences of prolonged sexual rejection in a marriage is the increased vulnerability to emotional or physical affairs. While no one wants to believe their spouse or themselves could ever cross that line, the truth is that unfulfilled emotional and physical needs, when ignored or dismissed, can make even the most committed hearts susceptible to temptation. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, subtly, and often in silence. Affairs rarely begin with lust. They usually begin with loneliness. A rejected spouse, longing for connection, begins to open up emotionally to someone who simply listens, someone who makes them feel seen, valued, or attractive again. It might be a coworker, a friend, or even a stranger online. At first, it seems harmless, a kind word, a shared frustration, a spark of feeling important. But when that emotional door opens, it becomes harder to close. What was once a faithful heart now starts looking elsewhere for what it no longer receives at home. Sexual rejection doesn't justify infidelity, but it can create the emotional vulnerability that leads to it. And the pain of betrayal, once it happens, is devastating to both partners. The rejected spouse may have never wanted to be unfaithful, but months or years of feeling unwanted, unloved, and emotionally dismissed can cloud their judgment. The rejecting spouse, in turn, feels shocked and hurt, often unaware of how deep the emotional wounds had become. They didn't see the affair coming, but the seeds were quietly sown in the soil of neglect. Even if an affair never takes place, the emotional affair, the fantasizing, the pulling away, the building of walls can still deeply damage the marriage. Emotional infidelity in many cases is just as painful as physical unfaithfulness. It signals that someone else now holds the place that was once reserved only for the spouse. And it confirms the painful suspicion that maybe we really are growing apart. This is why consistent, loving sexual connection is so important in marriage. It's not just about passion, it's about protection. When a husband and wife are physically and emotionally connected, they become each other's safe place. They fill the gaps before the world has a chance to. They satisfy each other's deepest needs so that no one else becomes a substitute. If you've been in a season of withholding or rejection, now is the time to take it seriously, not out of fear, but out of love. Your marriage matters, your spouse's heart matters, and the best defense against infidelity, emotional or physical, is a marriage that's rich with openness, intimacy, and intentional connection. No one wakes up one day and decides to have an affair. It's a gradual drift away from one another, often paved with the unmet need for closeness. But here's the good news. That drift can be stopped, even reversed. It begins when two people commit to showing up again, not just in the bedroom, but in the heart. Affairs don't have to be part of your story, but connection must be, because connection is what keeps the covenant alive. When sexual rejection becomes a recurring pattern in a marriage, it doesn't just create emotional pain, it begins to chip away at something even more foundational, trust. Trust is the bedrock of any lasting relationship, and in marriage, it goes beyond honesty or fidelity. It includes the confidence that your spouse will be there for you, not just in times of crisis, but in the quiet, daily needs of love, affirmation, and connection. When one spouse's need for intimacy is continually dismissed, ignored, or belittled, that trust begins to unravel. The rejected spouse may start to feel unsafe, not physically, but emotionally. They begin to doubt that their vulnerability will be honored, that their longings will be respected, or that their attempts at closeness will be welcomed. They may feel as though their emotional needs are inconvenient, even burdensome, and slowly they stop trusting their partner with their heart. They may smile, go through the motions, even remain loyal, but inside they feel alone, unprotected, and unimportant. This loss of trust doesn't just affect the one who is being rejected. The rejecting spouse is impacted too. Often they don't realize how their actions are being interpreted, and they may begin to feel misunderstood or pressured. As a result, they might pull away even further, not out of malice, but out of discomfort or fear. Over time, both partners begin to walk on eggshells, afraid to bring up intimacy, unsure how to reconnect, unsure how to restore the trust that once came so easily. What complicates this even more is that many couples don't talk about it. They avoid the subject of sex altogether, thinking it will only lead to more arguments or hurt feelings. But that silence doesn't bring peace. It breeds assumptions, and assumptions are often worse than reality. The rejected spouse assumes they're no longer desired. The other spouse assumes their partner is being selfish or insensitive, and the trust between them, once solid, begins to crack under the weight of misunderstanding. But here's the truth. Trust can be rebuilt. Even if it's been fractured by years of disconnection or unspoken pain, it can be restored through intentional, vulnerable communication. When a couple sits down and speaks honestly, not to accuse, but to understand, they can begin to mend what's been broken. Trust doesn't return overnight. It comes back slowly through small acts of openness, through empathy, and through the willingness to reach for one another again. Sexual rejection is not just a physical issue, it's a trust issue. But when couples treat it that way, with seriousness and sensitivity, they can begin the beautiful work of rebuilding. And from that rebuilt trust comes renewed intimacy, deeper love, and the safety of knowing you can trust me with your needs, your desires, and your heart, because I'm not going anywhere. Sexual rejection in marriage is rarely just about sex. In most cases, it's a symptom of something deeper going on beneath the surface. That's why one of the most important steps in healing intimacy is taking a compassionate and honest look at why the rejection is happening in the first place. When couples take the time to understand the reasons behind sexual withdrawal, they can begin to respond with empathy instead of defensiveness. And that shift can change everything. Sometimes sexual withdrawal is rooted in emotional disconnection. When a spouse feels hurt, angry, or unappreciated, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to engage in intimacy. After all, true sexual connection requires emotional safety. If conflict or unresolved resentment is present, the idea of physical closeness can feel more like pressure than love. In these cases, the rejection isn't really about desire. It's about emotional pain that hasn't been acknowledged or healed. In other situations, past trauma plays a powerful role. A spouse who has experienced sexual abuse, shame-based teachings about sex, or past relationship wounds may carry invisible scars into the marriage. For them, intimacy may trigger fear, anxiety, or guilt rather than joy. Without understanding this, the other spouse may interpret the rejection as a lack of love, when in reality it's a deep need for healing and safety. Another common factor is physical and hormonal changes, especially during seasons like pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, or illness. Fatigue, chronic pain, low libido, and other physiological factors can have a major impact on a person's ability or desire to engage in sex. Unfortunately, when these issues aren't talked about openly, the other spouse is often left confused or feeling rejected without explanation. Mental health also cannot be overlooked. Depression, anxiety, stress, or unresolved grief can create emotional and physical exhaustion, leaving little energy for intimacy. When the mind is weighed down, the body often follows. In these cases, the solution isn't to demand more sex, it's to support healing, compassion, and understanding. Sometimes the reason is more relational. Neglect, lack of appreciation, or feeling emotionally invisible can cause a spouse to shut down sexually. They may feel like just a caretaker, a provider, or a parent, but not a cherished partner. They may want to feel pursued emotionally before they can respond physically. And when those needs go unmet, withdrawal becomes a self-protective response. Understanding these underlying reasons doesn't excuse long-term rejection, but it does offer a clearer lens through which to view it. When couples stop asking, "Why are you doing this to me?" and start asking, "What's going on inside of you that I don't yet understand?" the walls begin to come down. Compassion replaces blame. Curiosity replaces frustration. And what once felt like an unbridgeable gap becomes an invitation to grow closer. Healing begins not by demanding answers, but by creating space for truth to be shared. By seeking understanding, together, a couple can uncover the hidden pain, fear, or confusion that's been sabotaging their intimacy. And once that happens, they can begin the real work of restoration. Restoring sexual intimacy in marriage is not about demanding more sex. It's about building a bridge of trust, understanding, and emotional connection through honest communication and empathy. When intimacy has been damaged by rejection, the only path back to closeness is paved with vulnerability. And that starts when both spouses feel safe enough to speak and to truly listen. For many couples, conversations around sex are laced with tension, shame, or fear. One spouse feels unwanted and afraid of more rejection. The other feels overwhelmed, misunderstood, or even accused. But unless these emotions are brought into the light with gentleness and care, they fester in silence, creating even more distance. That's why communication, real, honest, and kind communication, is not just helpful, it's essential. The key is to approach the conversation not as a confrontation, but as an invitation. Instead of saying, "You never want me," say, "I miss feeling close to you. I miss the connection we used to share." Instead of accusing, "You're rejecting me," say, "When we're not physically close, I begin to feel distant from you, and that scares me." When you speak from a place of longing instead of blaming, you open the door for your spouse to lean in rather than shut down. And listening, truly listening, is just as important. That means giving space for your spouse to share without interruption or defense. If your partner says they feel emotionally disconnected, unseen, or even physically exhausted, don't rush to fix it or minimize it. Just listen. Let their experience matter. Let them know that their voice is safe with you. Empathy means being willing to step into your spouse's world, to try and understand how they feel, even if you don't fully agree or comprehend it yet. If your partner has past trauma, sit with them in that pain. If they're struggling with body image, stress, or feeling emotionally invisible, don't dismiss it. validate it. Because what often breaks intimacy is not the struggle itself, it's the feeling of being alone in the struggle. The truth is, intimacy isn't just something you do, it's something you build. And every time you speak with tenderness, listen with empathy, and respond with grace, you are laying bricks in the foundation of a new connection. You are saying, I'm still here. I still want us. And that reassurance, spoken through both words and presence, can begin to restore even what's been broken for years. Restoring intimacy doesn't happen overnight. But when couples commit to open communication and compassionate curiosity, when they commit to seeking understanding over victory, healing begins. Hearts soften, desire slowly returns, and the love that felt lost begins to stir again. At its core, intimacy is the fruit of emotional safety, and emotional safety is born in the quiet moments where two people say, tell me what's on your heart, and I'll hold it with care. That kind of love makes even the most difficult conversations a doorway to deeper connection. Sexual rejection in marriage is often just the surface of a deeper story, one that involves unhealed emotional wounds, unresolved trauma, or years of pain that haven't been properly addressed. If a spouse withdraws from physical intimacy, it's rarely because they don't care. More often, it's because something hurts. That's why one of the most powerful steps in restoring sexual connection is the courage to heal the past wounds that are blocking physical closeness. For some, those wounds go back to childhood. Perhaps there was sexual abuse, unhealthy or shame-based religious teachings about sex, or a family environment where physical affection was either absent or unsafe. These early experiences often shape how a person feels about their body, their worth, and their comfort with physical closeness. In adulthood, those feelings can resurface within marriage, especially when sexual intimacy feels vulnerable, exposed, or pressured. Others carry wounds from within the marriage itself. Maybe there's been betrayal, emotional or physical, that was never fully healed. Maybe words were spoken in moments of anger that left lasting scars. Maybe there was neglect or years of feeling emotionally dismissed, where one spouse silently pulled away as a form of self-protection. Over time, those unresolved hurts form walls, and where there should be softness, there's resistance. Where there should be safety, there's guardedness. The body can't respond freely when the heart feels unsafe. It's easy to assume that time alone will heal these hurts. But time doesn't heal wounds. Intentional care does. That means creating space within the relationship to talk openly about past pain without judgment or defensiveness. It means being willing to grieve what was lost, to forgive what hurt, and to rebuild what was broken. Sometimes this healing process requires the help of a counselor or therapist, someone who can guide both spouses through the layers of hurt with skill and compassion. One of the most important things a spouse can do in this process is to be patient. Healing doesn't happen on demand. It can't be rushed. If your partner has pulled away sexually because of deep emotional pain, pressuring them to return to intimacy will only reinforce their fear. But showing consistent love, listening without fixing, and offering gentle reassurance can slowly create the safety they need to open their heart again. Healing also involves personal ownership. If you're the one who has caused pain, intentionally or unintentionally, it's never too late to apologize. A sincere, humble apology can be a turning point in restoring intimacy. It tells your spouse, I see how I hurt you, and I want to make it right. That kind of humility creates room for trust to grow again. Ultimately, sexual intimacy in marriage can only flourish when both spouses feel emotionally secure. When past wounds are ignored, they poison the present. But when they are acknowledged, grieved, and healed, they can become the very soil in which deeper love is grown. What once caused division can become the doorway to deeper union, because nothing builds intimacy like walking through pain together and coming out stronger on the other side. Your past does not have to dictate your future. Whatever pain you or your spouse carry, healing is possible. And when healing begins, so does the beautiful return of connection, body, heart, and soul. Rebuilding sexual intimacy after a season of rejection or disconnection isn't just about returning to physical acts. It's about reawakening desire, safety, and joy in the relationship. Many couples assume that if the spark is gone, it's gone for good, but that simply isn't true. Intimacy can be reignited, not by trying to recreate the past, but by creating new rhythms of connection, care, and tenderness in the present. Desire doesn't flourish in an environment of pressure, shame, or fear. It grows in a space where both partners feel emotionally seen, valued, and safe. For the spouse who has felt rejected, rebuilding desire begins with healing wounds and finding the courage to be vulnerable again. For the spouse who has withdrawn, it begins with trust, learning to feel safe in their own skin and in the arms of the one who loves them. The process of rebuilding starts with intentionality. Couples must prioritize time together, not just time to talk, but time to enjoy one another. Simple things like holding hands, hugging without expectation, laughing together, or spending quality time alone help reignite affection and familiarity. These seemingly small moments begin to thaw the emotional ice and pave the way toward deeper intimacy. It also requires openness, talking honestly about what you both enjoy, what you fear, and what you long for. Many couples never discuss their sexual lives outside of conflict. But when they learn to talk about sex without tension or shame, they often discover a new level of emotional connection that reignites the physical one. Joy, too, must be rediscovered. So many couples carry stress, fatigue, and unmet expectations into their intimate life. They forget that sex was meant to be not only sacred, but delightful. When couples can laugh together, explore gently, and experience freedom without judgment, joy returns. And joy is magnetic. It draws spouses toward each other, not out of obligation, but out of desire. Safety plays a crucial role. If either spouse feels emotionally unsafe due to past rejection, criticism, or unspoken pain, desire often shuts down. That's why the rebuilding process must be saturated in kindness, patience, and compassion. It's not about performance, it's about presence. It's not about perfection. It's about pursuing each other with humility and love. And finally, couples must remember that rebuilding sexual intimacy is not a one-time event. It's a journey. There will be good days and slow days, moments of progress and moments of hesitation. But if both partners are willing to keep showing up, keep choosing each other, and keep trusting that love can grow again, something beautiful happens. The bedroom once filled with distance or pain becomes a sanctuary once more, a place of connection, healing, and joy. Reigniting desire doesn't mean going back to who you were at the beginning of your marriage. It means discovering who you can become now together. And when desire, safety, and joy return, intimacy doesn't just resume, it deepens, transforming your marriage into something richer, more tender, and more resilient than ever before. Sexual rejection in marriage is far more than a momentary refusal. It's a message, whether intentional or not. It speaks to the heart of the one who is turned away. Over time, that message can echo as loneliness, insecurity, and emotional distance. But the good news, the grace-filled truth, is this: it doesn't have to stay that way. Every marriage goes through seasons. Some are marked by passion and closeness, others by tension and silence. But healing is possible. Restoration is possible. Even after months or years of sexual disconnection, couples can rediscover not only intimacy, but a renewed sense of trust, laughter, and unity. It starts with understanding, it grows through empathy, and it thrives when two people commit to stop hiding, start healing, and move forward together. compassion, start healing and move forward together. We've talked about the emotional toll of rejection, the risk of affairs, the walls that form, and the deeper wounds often hiding beneath the surface. But more importantly, we've seen the pathway forward: honest communication, courageous vulnerability, patient healing, and the beautiful possibility of rediscovering one another, body, heart, and soul. So if you're in a marriage where sexual rejection has created distance, don't lose hope. You are not alone. Many couples have walked this road and come out stronger, and so can you. Seek the help you need. Start the conversations that matter. Make the daily choice to pursue your spouse with love, not resentment, and above all, believe that your marriage, yes, yours, can be restored. Because when two people choose healing over hiding, when they choose connection over comfort, when they choose to fight for each other instead of pulling away from each other, miracles happen. Marriages are mended. Intimacy is rekindled. And love grows deeper than ever before. Let this be your invitation, not to settle for a marriage of quiet distance, but to reach again for the beauty of closeness, to fight for oneness, and to remember your spouse is not your enemy. They're your teammate, your lover, your gift from God. Choose each other again today and again tomorrow, because that choice, day after day, is what builds a marriage that lasts. If this message spoke to your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, ask a question, begin a conversation. You never know whose life or marriage might be changed because you dared to speak up. And until next time, I'm Dr. Joe Bean, reminding you that no matter how far things may seem to have drifted, love is never beyond repair.